The story begins with a huge building, and a voiceover tells us that buying an apartment was the biggest dream of his life. It would seem that there were a huge number of apartments in the world that could be bought, but unfortunately for our main character, there was no suitable offer for him. With the exception of one house, we are shown how the boy stands with the old man on the threshold of a new house. But still, the gray-haired grandfather tells the student to think a few more times before making such an important decision. He thought that he was crazy and did not want to show him this house at all. His grandfather was even going to turn a blind eye to the contract. Just look at this place. It seems that this ancient house has already been cursed by all possible witches and fortune tellers, but this doesn't stop the guy and he buys the house. Judging by the expression on his face, he was not very happy that he would live here. But still, he reassured himself that this place was right on his side street. While he opens the door with fear, the guy talks about how he was in high school and after 2 years in the army, he worked hard to earn enough money. But even after all his efforts, he failed to save too much and only has enough for an old dusty shack. Since he only has enough money for this house, he will have to live here. But even the old man does not dare cross the threshold and says that he would better leave here as soon as possible. This house was simply being sold at an incredibly low price. The main character at first simply could not believe that he was so lucky. But still, there was one problem. It was a damn haunted house and someone managed to die here, so living here promises to be fun. When the building was sold for practically nothing, there were too many tenants here after the death of one of them, but none of them could live here for more than a week. The light, of course, doesn't work here, and now the main character has to use a flashlight. A notification about the anniversary of his parents' death appeared on his phone. Looking around, the boy thought that this house really looked creepy, but somehow he would have to get along with the ghosts that live here. Still, he understands that he will have to live with his grandmother if he does not stay in this apartment, and his grandmother's house was much worse for him than a prison, so it is better to live with ghosts for a while. The situation was not so gloomy after all, because now he had a huge house at his disposal, albeit a cursed one, but still a huge house. Of course, he thought so, until the first moment when strange things began to happen. Suddenly, the main character hears a terrible noise. The space changes just like in a horror movie, and the boy hears a girl crying in the other room. If I were him, I would already be packing my things and going to live with my grandmother. The main character listened carefully to the voice and realized that it was completely different from the sound of wind or anything else, which means that it was definitely a ghost. Before moving, the guy was told that absolutely no one lived in this house, which meant that there shouldn't even be a person here. Still, he hopes to the last that this is just a homeless person who decided to go into an old house to sleep, so he tries to calm himself down. Still, he has thoughts that it could be a damn ghost. But the main character still decides to turn the door handle. Since he has already decided to live here, he needs to try to get used to it. He'll just look at what's in that room and then decide to call him at police or not. Still, the boy has already gone through a lot in order to get this house, which means now he can't just retreat in the face of a ghost. But only after opening the door, they show us a girl with black hair who is sitting on the floor and crying. Guys, the situation turned out to be much worse than we thought. It's not a ghost, it's a woman. Like a true Sigma, at the mere sight of a girl, he begins to scream and get scared, but only he screams not from fear but from joy, because in front of him there was truly a beautiful girl. At one point, our boy even began to think that he was sleeping because there was a real beauty in front of him. Maybe he was sleeping. Or maybe the main character went crazy with the fear of ghosts and began hallucinating. All the same, he really could have just been very frightened, but his main theory still remained one thing. Most likely this lady was a ghost. And while she was trying to demonstrate her skills in playing basketball, the main character just stood and looked at her training, thinking that she was really doing great. After which the lady also notices our boy, and looking into each other's eyes, they now simply do not understand what to do. The ghost turns out to have simply amazing abilities, because she summoned a real mountain that amazed the main character. And while they were telling us about this mountain, which is 200 billion kilometers high, the girl was simply terrified because she did not expect that anyone would see her practicing basketball. But the main character also gets scared by her scream and starts screaming, "What the hell?" Not only was she in his house, but she also has the right to be scared. Suddenly he realizes that the situation is far from the best and decides, like a true man, to simply run away from his problems. But the door behind him suddenly closes, and while he is trying to open it, the girl in the background seems to be trying to apologize for frightening him so much. Still, he decides to calm down quickly because if suddenly she turns out to be a human, then he may have serious problems and he will have to explain himself in court. Turning to her, he still tries to explain the situation to her, saying that the door was locked and he had absolutely no intention of watching her train. But a towel instantly flies into his face, and the boy doesn't even have time to finish his story. The girl continued to throw everything that came to hand at him and screamed that he should not come near her. But he still tried to explain that this was all a stupid misunderstanding. Still, he understood that he needed to explain to her that the situation is not what it might seem at first glance. But like in any other manhwa, he trips on a roll of paper and falls to the floor. Suddenly all the magic disappeared and the mountain was destroyed. It's a shame because she was only 22 years old, just like our main character. What a coincidence. The girl still thought that after the fall, the main character simply lost consciousness, but he, like a zombie, gets up and says that he urgently needs to explain everything. Just look at him. He looked even worse than that ghost. When she sees such a terrible face of the main character, she immediately begins to scream in fear. It would seem that she is a ghost, but is afraid of an ordinary person. After which these two idiots lose consciousness, one because she was too scared and the main character because he fell too hard. Our next chapter begins with the fact that we are shown the beautiful singing of birds. It seemed that the horror that was no longer there. Our main character simply sat in front of the lady and thought how he could now deal with this situation. They sat opposite each other for too long and didn't say a word. The boy even began to think about just quickly running away to live with his grandmother, even though there were prison conditions there, but it was still better than with ghosts. Still, the boy finds strength in himself and asks her about who she is. She could be a person who ended up here by chance or cursed by a ghost. But just look at her frightened expression on her face after all. She confirms that she is a ghost, and now the boy has no more doubts. She certainly looked like a person and was a pretty nice girl, but the guy couldn't understand why the ghost was scared of an ordinary person. All the same, the lady turns out to be a real nice girl and is surprised that the main character can see her, because usually people don't see ghosts. Now the girl was only thinking about the fact that he had seen her practice basketball. Until that moment, this had never happened to her. But a terribly awkward silence appeared in the room again. Since the boy will now have to live here, the girl accepts him and asks what brought him to such a terrible place. After which he begins to tell her the story of buying this house and that he will now live here. While the girl was terribly scared, the main character still hopes that she will allow him to live here in peace and will not bother him again. But she suddenly starts crying and says that she won't do this because she lived here alone from the very beginning. From the very beginning, the girl was the very first person who lived in this house and thought that now they would be best friends with this house. But then something terrible happened, and after the lady's death, new owners began to appear who took the house for themselves without giving her the opportunity to live in it peacefully. But according to the contract, the house still belonged to her, and she believed that this was all a very big misunderstanding that she could not correct. While our boy sat in shock and thought that he was listening to the story of a ghost girl, just like in the movie Ghostbusters, the girl said that she still had to do a lot of things in the world of the living. In any case, no matter how it was still her home. So for now, she politely asked the main character to simply leave here of his own free will. But the guy didn't even respond to her request, and she didn't understand why the hell he was still sitting here. She had already explained everything to him, and why he still hadn't left her house. But suddenly her face becomes more serious, and she warns that if he doesn't leave, she will do something terrible. While he was saying all this, the guy already thought that she was casting a spell to put a curse on him. But she simply shouts out that she will open all the windows and doors, and then the main character will get sick. Now the boy was in complete shock because the girl seemed like she was mentally ill. In such cases, she still decides that if the main character does not leave, then every night he will die from a terrible cold. She even said the magic word for him to leave, but does she really think that for a person who paid his last money for an apartment this matters? Still, turning around, she looked carefully at herself and realized that something had changed, as if she had turned from a ghost into a human for some time. Looking in the mirror again, she realizes that there really is something wrong here, because ghosts are not reflected in mirrors, but just what the hell happened. In complete despair, the girl asks if the boy sees her reflection. Of course he sees her very clearly, but it seems to him that this is the last thing she needs to worry about now. Still, she tried to figure out what was happening now, because from the very moment of her death, the girl had not seen her own reflection, and now the boy managed to see her, but what affected her ghostly form. Still, having carefully examined herself, she understands that she has lost her ghost form, but why at this particular moment? It turns out that something strange happened after she found some kind of shirt for herself and decided to try it on. It seems that it is this that influences her ghostly form. While the main character was trying to figure out what the hell was going on here, her hypothesis turned out to be true, and she returned to the appearance of a ghost, so she knew that it was all because of that damned shirt. Now she stood and thought about why this particular shirt managed to turn her into a person, because before that she had worn other shirts, but it did not give such an effect. Was it really made of some special material? While he decides to find out where the kid managed to find such a shirt, he says that it was from a special section in the store where there were 90% discounts, so I don't think it's the material. Still, his shirt cost less than a pack of chips, so it would be strange to assume that it was the problem, or maybe it still had some special property. She thought that this was the main character's special power, and it was because he wore this shirt, he managed to endow it with special powers. But for now, our boy was thinking about the fact that he was stuck in this house with the ghost of a crazy girl. Still, she decides to test this strange theory and asks the main character to give her something that was always with him. Of course, it turns out to be a phone. But all this time, the guy thought that they were trying to curse him. Looking in the mirror once again, she can again see her reflection and understands that her theory turned out to be true. But how is this even possible? While she was wondering what could be so special about this guy, he was already thinking about how he could get out of this apartment as quickly as possible. Suddenly, all the closets and windows that were in the apartment began to open. The brunette had long ago stopped understanding what was happening, but now he was already in complete shock. While she was trying to find something in her closet, the guy was trying to analyze everything that was happening now. Still, he thinks that the girl is actually not a bad ghost, but he was clearly uncomfortable. But he understands perfectly well that she can simply pretend to be a good ghost in order to find the right moment and attack. After all, there were many rumors that everyone who appeared in this house died in a terrible way, so he should be much more careful. Suddenly, she calls the boy over, but he was in his own thoughts, so he's a little scared by such a harsh phrase. The girl turns out to have been looking for some pink book in the closet all this time and asked the main character to read it for her. Although he cannot understand such a strange request, he still agrees. And who knows what else this lady can come up with? Can she really not know how to read? But this turns out to be far from a simple book, because a whole list of wishes was written on it. Apparently, she still wanted to fulfill something before going to the next world. While the main character carefully examined the book, he realized that this book belonged to a girl named Sola. It seemed that there was nothing terrible there. So far, the boy was trying to read everything that was written there and understood that the girl had described her desires in some detail and was saying that he had the opportunity to fulfill them all. She invites him to sign a contract. If suddenly the boy can help her complete all these tasks, then she will simply leave this house and leave him alone. The boy simply could not understand why the girl was asking him for help, but she tells him that thanks to his power, she can take on a human form. Apparently that there is something mystical in the guy, which is why he can do this. She still could not fully explain to him how this ability worked, but still, no one else had such powers except him. Still, quite a large number of people lived in this house, and no one before the main character treated her well, so they paid for it. But the main character is special, which is why she asks him for help. She also tells him that if he helps her fulfill her wishes, she will give him her piggy bank she thought for a long time about the fact that she wants to fulfill her wishes and therefore saved money for their fulfillment. And here I was already a little shocked. I thought that there would be coins there, but it turns out that the ghost managed to save quite a large amount of money. Even Mr. Beast would have been jealous of such a fortune.
The boy looked strangely at this pile of money and tried to understand how much money there was, but it seemed to the girl that the main character simply began to doubt that such a sum would be enough to fulfill her dreams.
Now the guy was in a vague state. On the one hand, this whole situation with ghosts and a lot of money was too strange, and on the other hand, he still didn't believe her that she would just leave the house that she defended so ardently. So also some strange ability that allowed her to get out of the form of a ghost and turn back into a person. In short, the main character was completely confused about what he should do now. In addition, she was too different from those strange cases that people told. She looked like a real person, and he found it hard to believe that she could kill so many people. So also this strange pile of money that appeared literally out of thin air. One could assume that all this time the residents who ran away from the house simply left their things and she took them for herself. But this was even stranger. Be that as it may, it was still pointless for him to think about such things because, in fact, he would still have no other choice because she would not let him leave the house until he fulfilled her wish list. In short, 2 million questions were in his head at the same time, and he tried to understand what he should do now because it was simply impossible that only he was able to see her. All his questions found only one single solution, namely to take her legs in her hands and run as quickly as possible before she had time to come to her senses. But suddenly the lady simply took him by the hands and it seems that she began to cry. Is she really going to deliberately put pressure on Pity so that he will help her? Yes, she really started to cry and said that more than anything in the world she wanted to fulfill her wish list, and now that she had such an opportunity, she did not want to miss it. She begins to tell her story. It turns out that her parents died in an accident and her grandmother took care of her, who treated her terribly and did not allow anything. Then after a while she also died and turned into a ghost, after which a simply terrible picture appears before the eyes of the main character, where he stands in complete horror, doused with cherry juice, and looks at something. After which we are shown a car that crashed into a tree right during the holiday. It turns out that along the way it managed to hit one person. It turns out that there are even two. And now we see some kind of grandmother standing in front of her temple. She was already shown there, and it was the grandmother of the main character. After such a terrible event, she decided that once and for all she would lock up her temple and turn it into a prison. Now we understand the reason why the boy said that his grandmother's house looked like a prison. Inside this temple there were portraits of his parents that were placed on the altar. From that moment our boy remained an orphan, and the only one who looked after him was that same grandmother. The only thing he could do then was just sit in front of the portraits of his dead parents and cry bitter tears. And now the actions are transferred back to our time, and after the story of this ghost, he simply had no words. Perhaps this will be the motivation for him to help her. All the same, the boy looked as if he would soon cry, and looking at her wish list, he understood that this, in general, could be accomplished very easily, as if the girl just wanted to live a little ordinary life before going to the next world. There was only one point in which she wanted to have fun with her friends all day, but even the main character did not understand how to fulfill it, because he himself did not have such a thing then. While he was crying, suddenly the main character says that he agrees to fulfill her last wishes, after which she raises her head and cannot believe her ears. He says that he clearly heard her request and is going to help fulfill her last wishes so that she can safely go to the next world. Having said that he was going to help her with everything, the girl was simply shocked by these words because no one had ever agreed to help such a ghost like her. Afterwards, she just starts crying even harder and tries to hide it, but she does a pretty bad job. She even decides to hug the main character because he agreed to help her. Did no one really agree to help her before? While the girl was trying to say thank you to him, the main character was thinking about the decision he was making, whether it was truly correct. She kept saying thank you, but the boy still wasn't entirely sure that the girl was telling him the truth. But even if she lied to him, it didn't matter to him at all because every time he looked at her, he remembered how, as a child, everyone abandoned him and his childhood turned into a real hell. Well, since they have already finished dealing with her wish list, the boy asks that the basketballs be removed from the court, and then they can start fulfilling her list. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the girl understands that all this time the basketball court was not cleaned, and it was necessary to correct this situation as soon as possible. It turns out that the previous residents left behind a lot of things, but they were in simply terrible condition. Therefore, the main character invites the girl to go to the nearest store to buy all the necessary things. But judging by her face, it was clear that she did not feel comfortable because she had been in this house for many years and did not go outside. She still tells us that when she was alive, she couldn't have fun with her friends normally, and after her death she was too afraid to leave the territory of the house for too long, so now she was nervous and the boy noticed it. It turns out that he also remembered his childhood when he was locked in this damn temple and simply could not get out of there. So he very much understands what the girl is feeling now. He simply tells her that if she is worried, then she can start with one step. He also never had fun with his friends, so he is also very worried. Still, he opens the door and says that he still wants to start a new life for himself, but if the lady is too scared to change, then he will go to the new world alone. He simply extended his hand to lead her out into the street, but for a long time she did not dare to make a final decision. But just look at how her face instantly changes after the guy supports her, as if she was given a second chance to correct all her mistakes. Still, holding hands, they leave the apartment and the girl tells him that she has a few more piggy banks, but he asks her to leave this money to fulfill her own desires. After which the action moves to a rather busy city. You can imagine how the girl will feel after so many years that she spent in that house. But everything turns out to be not so bad. The girl was just looking around the city and thought that it was incredibly beautiful here. Before she could only see the city from the window of a car or a house, and the main character felt strange. All this time he was worried that she might be worried because of the large number of people, but she said that it was much easier for her to be next to the boy. It was quite cute to see the guy walking with the ghost, and while she thought that there were so many people on the street, the boy asked to wait a second. Still, he noticed that the girl stood out too much among the general crowd and also attracted a lot of glances, and this could only mean one thing. Now other people saw her too. But still, it didn't matter to her that everyone was looking at her. The main thing was that she was next to a guy who agreed to help her, but he thought that she needed to find a store as quickly as possible. Suddenly, he noticed that someone was trying to photograph the girl, but just one look from the main character is enough for the guy to instantly change his mind about becoming a photographer. Still, the guy left and thought that the girl was to blame because she was too beautiful, after which he ran away. Suddenly, the lady called him and he thought that she had already managed to find something. Just look at her happy face because she had just found machines where they could play various games, so she asked the main character to go there first. But still, he explains to her that first they had to go to the store to buy the necessary things because her ghost outfit stood out too much from the general crowd. He asked the girl to go around the store and look for new things for herself, while he went to the nearest chair to rest. The boy tried to understand whether she could cope or not, but she immediately approached the consultant and asked to be shown their most beautiful dresses. And our main character decided that it would be a great idea to sit and study her wish list in detail, like this diary from Gravity Falls. It turns out that he never read this list completely, and therefore was worried because he essentially signed a contract that he did not read, and was afraid that he would not be able to do something that she wanted. This is not a meme. This is the expression of our main character after he found out that the girl was going to play basketball. There were several pages where there were many different courts on which she wanted to play. Well, after this moment the boy realized that now his wish list turns out to be much more complicated than he thought. While he was looking at new images, our main character thought that in fact she just accidentally wrote down all these points in her diary. From the very beginning, he could not believe that such a sweet girl could play such a harsh game as basketball, but still he remembers everything that happened and understands that in fact it may be true. Since he finally agreed to help her with everything that was on this damned list, he would have to learn to play basketball, no matter how bad he was at this game. Still, he thought that the girl was an abnormal ghost who could not normally get rid of playing basketball, but suddenly someone called him and scared him terribly. It turns out that this is a girl who has already finished choosing new things for herself and was worried about the main character that he did not answer her for a long time. Also, the main character had a terribly red face. Was he really that tired of her helping her, or he managed to get sick after leaving the damned house? Still, he decides to find out about all the details later, because now was really not the time. The boy simply says that his leg was cramped and he was in terrible pain. The boy simply asked her to leave him and give him the opportunity to sit quietly. Then we understand that the special ability called the mountain is activated again. After which the main character decides that it would be a great idea to go with the girl to a cafe, because she hasn't been able to eat normal human food for a long time. Judging by her facial expression, she really liked it in this cafe. After which they decided to go shopping to buy them a pair of clothes. It seems that he was not against such an idea. Then they decided to go eat ice cream, and now the girl's brain was frozen. It seems that after many years without ice cream, she was terribly ill. Then she saw a slot machine and asked the boy to let her play once, but he said that she could play as much as she wanted. When the girl had already spent quite a lot of money on these slot machines, night had already fallen, and now it was time for our guys to go home.
Still, they managed to complete so many items from her list, and now they could go tomorrow to buy everything else. Today they really had fun.
But suddenly the guy declares that he wants to go have a bite to eat, and now he has seen a suitable place for this. It turns out to be some kind of supermarket, and he decides to show her how ordinary Koreans spend their day. Still, he says that she can choose whatever she wants because today they will have fun for a long time, and for now he will take a few things for the house. Of course he can say that because he is spending money from the girl. Looking through different jars of care products, he wonders if this will be enough for him, because he still needed to buy many other things. But all this time, the boy was haunted by the thought that, in fact, the girl had written so many different options for playing basketball on her wish list, a ghost and the truth. It was difficult for him to even imagine how to fulfill these points. Still, in the end, he decides to take this product and thinks that if suddenly he made a mistake and misunderstood her list, he will simply return everything back to the store. But suddenly that same lady appears and says that she has already been able to find something. The guy immediately gets scared from such a sudden appearance and thinks that now he might get caught playing basketball. And while all this is happening, we end our video today on such a nice note. Thank you very much everyone for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel so that the new part comes out as soon as possible and you don't miss it.